Excellent. It's good to see you. I'd like to, in fact, write on this topic, so I thought I might try and give a lecture rather than assigning it to you for work that you're supposed to do. I want to talk today a little bit about the manuscripts of the Canterbury Tales and why some people think that the tales that Chaucer left behind should be divided into larger units, which scholars call fragments. There's a move to get rid of the fragments at this point, to stop thinking about them, but I think we should hang on to them. So, from the great reports you guys gave, we know that Chaucer planned roughly 120 tales for the Canterbury Tales. This appears at the end of the general prologue, where the host sets up this plan to have each of the 9 and 20 pilgrims, so roughly 30 pilgrims, tell 2 tales on the way out and 2 tales on the way back to his inn, so they can all, have another great feast with him, which would result, 4 times 30 is 120 tales, about the length of the Decameron, but a little bit better. Chaucer was planning to be a little bit better than Boccaccio. He only, however, completed 24 of them. He didn't come close to doing what Boccaccio did. And these survive, again, as we heard in your reports, in roughly 80 manuscripts. But what I'd like to focus on now are the 2 most important of those 80 manuscripts. One is called Hengert and the other is called Ellesmere. The Hengert manuscript survives in the National Library of Wales. You could have guessed it, given that lovely name for it. In the Pennyarth collection would be manuscript 392D. That writing is too small for me, but if you can read it, I think, or if you go to the website and find it, and Googling Hengert manuscript will actually bring you almost directly to this. Any trouble, let me know, but I think you'll find it with no trouble. What they say in their opening scribe is that this manuscript was written by Adam Pankhurst, that I can see, and they date it between 1395 and 1405. Those dates are important because Chaucer dies in 1400. If it's written before 1400, Adam may have had access to Chaucer. And indeed, we have other references by Chaucer to a scribe named Adam. And so it seems likely that he knew Adam Pankhurst and that this is a scribe that Chaucer would have worked with. But if it's written after 1400, even if it's by Adam, Chaucer's dead, and Adam can no longer go to Chaucer and ask him what's going on in the Canterbury Tales. He doesn't have that source of information. In any case, this opening slide's important, but what's cool there is that that's the cover, and you can start turning the pages and, read online the manuscript that I would have needed to go to Wales in order to see. So you keep flipping pages, and you come to this one, a little ratty at this point, but what a beautiful manuscript. And you start reading, and your jaw drops. Juan the Rapro with his shores sota, the truth of Merch hath pierced to the rota. This is the opening of the general prologue. Here you have Chaucer's greatest work in a manuscript that might have been written in his own time, but certainly if it wasn't, it's very close to him. Now, the general prologue comes to an end, and we move directly into the Knight's Tale. And these moments are linked within the story. They draw straws. The knight draws the shortest straw, and so he's assigned the telling of the first tale. And so we move directly into, you're going to hear his tale, to here beginneth the Knight's Tale. Here begins the Knight's Tale. Willem, as old as stories tellin us, there was a duke that hechted Theseus, and of his, and off we go into the Knight's Tale. No separation between the general prologue, the introduction of all the pilgrims, and the framed narrative, straight into the first tale. Now, if we keep flipping folios, we come to the end of the Knight's Tale. Here is ended the Knight's Tale, the prologue of the Miller's Tale. So this is what the manuscript does with that. And again, Chaucer links it in a narrative way as well. So the knight ends his tale, and everybody says, "Oh, wasn't that great?" Except for the miller, who says, "No, I know a tale which I can use to quite the Chaucerian word that I can use to respond to what the knight has just said." And off he launches into his tale. We get the prologue to the tale, and then we move into the tale itself. Now, below it, what I've shown you is, at the end of the miller's tale, we move into, at the end of the prologue, excuse me, my eyes aren't good enough to get this, we move into the miller's tale. So we have that transition. And we could see, sorry, I don't want to jump ahead, we could see this same pattern at the end of the miller's tale, where we have a narrative link to the reeve's tale. The reeve hates the miller, and so he's going to tell a tale in order to show up the miller, and launches into his story that's linked in the manuscript in very much the same way. And then the cook responds to the reeve. He thinks it's really funny, and it reminds him of a story that he'd like to tell. So again, linked in the same way, we move from the reeve's tale to the cook's tale. So we've gone knight, miller, reeve, cook, all linked in the manuscript, and also all linked by Chaucer by describing the reactions of these characters to the previous tales. But, and this is the slide we want next, when we come to the end of the cook's tale, and it's not the end of the cook's tale, it's a story about a guy who gets, kicked out of his business because, or his apprenticeship, because he gambles. So he decides he's going to rob his boss and take off and have some fun. He finds a prostitute that he's going to live with, and she's described in this last line as having a shop, but suived, but engaged in prostitution, for here sustenance. And here doesn't just mean her living, but it means their living. He lives off of her prostitution. It's not really a story. You should read it. It's a fascinating sort of beginning to a story. But what we're interested in today is how the scribe handles this. Notice that Adam Pinkhurst leaves the rest of this folio blank and then writes in the margin, probably later, of this cook's tale, Chaucer maketh no more. Chaucer didn't write any more of the cook's tale. Now, would Adam Pinkhurst have written that if he could have gone to Chaucer and said, "Where's the rest of the tale? What's going on here?" It doesn't seem too likely. It seems as though he thought he could find it and then realizes that there's no more of it. So he breaks it off at that moment. He leaves the page blank, and maybe he'll find it later and write more of it, but he doesn't have it. He doesn't have access to it. This is the end of the first fragment. This group of linked stories that includes the general prologue, the knight's tale, the miller's tale, the reeve's tale, and the fragmentary cook's tale, but then breaks off at this point. It stops. And if we turn the page here, we come to the beginning of the man of law's tale. That would be fragment 2 in the old way of thinking about how the Canterbury Tales is structured. Now, let's just develop this by looking at the other great Chaucer manuscript. This is the Ellesmere manuscript. It's in California in the Huntington Library, EL 26C9. Again, equally beautiful manuscript, maybe more beautiful manuscript, written again by Adam Pinkhurst. And look at it at some point, flip the pages, they're beautiful. The only one I want to call to your attention at this point is the end of the reeve's tale, which lets us into the cook's tale, right? Prologue, then cook's tale, with this wonderful illustration of the cook. But look what Adam Pinkhurst has to do again. he breaks it off with a shop and suivit vorher sustenance, and then again leaves this blank half a page at the bottom. Now, if you could look at the next folio, what you'd see, or the next page, what you'd see is this beautiful beginning that marks the start of the next major fragment. Excuse me. But the point is that there's no more of the Canterbury Tales that can be added in at this point. What are the consequences of this for understanding the Canterbury Tales? First and foremost, it seems as clear that Chaucer did intend to group sets of tales together. He wanted the knight's tale to be followed by the miller's tale, and the miller to be followed by the reeve, and the reeve to be followed by the cook. But he hadn't figured out yet how to then shift to the next big group of tales. He hadn't made that transition, and he stops working on the Canterbury Tales before he ties it all together. So we're left with a really tricky sort of interpretive problem. How do we understand not just the individual tales, but also their relationship to the tales with which they're grouped? Chaucer's scholarship is moving away from this idea of the fragments, and I intend to write strongly saying that we've got to preserve the idea of the fragments. And why? Well, you'll never guess. Because Chaucer took it from the Decameron. Chaucer's fragments are the equivalent of Boccaccio's days. Chaucer introduces a theme, and the fragment is on that theme. It may have other things that it's talking about or working with or that we may be interested in, but in the same way that 8.1 and 8.2 and 8.10 are all kind of linked together in a kind of sense of how that day works, Chaucer's fragments mirror that larger structure. That's the point of this. Thank you. We'll see you in class. Bye.